The moment Karen Thompson clutched for laminated HOA rulebook, Sarah Martinez knew trouble was brewing. It was a scorching Saturday morning in Oak Ridge Estates, and Karen stood in the middle of the street, her neon green clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield of bureaucratic righteousness. Violation. Karen's voice cut through the peaceful neighborhood like a foghorn. She pointed dramatically at Sarah's carefully maintained front yard, where a single patch of wildflowers dared to bloom outside the prescribed landscaping guidelines. Sarah watched in disbelief as Karen began scribbling furiously. This wasn't the first time, and everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen's reputation. She was more than just an AHO board member. She was a self-appointed neighborhood dictator who lived for the moment she could issue a citation. The wildflowers had been a memorial garden, planted in memory of Sarah's mother, who had loved native plants and believed in letting nature breathe between perfectly manicured lawns. Each purple and yellow bloom was a remembrance, a small rebellion against the sterile perfection Karen demanded. Those flowers are exactly 2.3 inches outside the approved landscaping zone, Karen announced, her reading glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. That's a clear violation of Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the Oak Ridge Estates Landscaping Covenant. Neighbors began to peek out their windows. Mark Reynolds, who lived 2 doors down, rolled his eyes. Lisa Chen from the corner house stopped watering her regulation-approved rose bushes to watch the spectacle. Sarah took a deep breath. Those flowers mean something to me, Karen. They're not hurting anyone. But Karen was already writing. Her pen moved with the precision of a surgeon, each stroke a calculated attack on Sarah's peaceful morning. Within minutes, a bright yellow citation was stapled to Sarah's mailbox, the beacon of bureaucratic tyranny that seemed to mock the delicate wildflowers. "You'll have 10 days to remove these unauthorized plants," Karen declared, her voice a mixture of triumph and self-righteousness, "or face a fine of $250 per day." What Karen didn't know was that this moment would become the spark of a neighborhood revolution. Sarah wasn't just going to take this lying down. The clipboard-wielding AHO terror had no idea what was coming. As Karen marched away, a clipboard held high like a trophy, Sarah's eyes narrowed. The perfectly manicured street of Oak Ridge Estates was about to witness a transformation that would shake its very foundations. Sarah knew she couldn't fight Karen alone. The HOA board was stacked with Karen's friends and enablers, a tight-knit group of retirees who seemed to have nothing better to do than enforce microscopic rules about lawn heights, fence colors, and flower placements. That evening, she created a private neighborhood group chat. Not on Facebook, not on Nextdoor. Those were too public, too easily monitored. Instead, she used a secure messaging app that her tech-savvy cousin had recommended. "We need to talk," Sarah's first message read. "Karen Thompson has gone too far." The responses came quickly. Mark Reynolds was the first to reply. "I got 3 citations last month for my son's basketball hoop being 3 inches too tall." 3 citations. Lisa Chen chimed in next. "My grandmother's wind chimes were apparently creating excessive noise pollution. They're antique, handcrafted in Japan. They barely make a sound." By midnight, 15 households had joined the secret group. They shared stories of Karen's relentless rule enforcement. Citations for Christmas decorations put up 2 days too early, warnings about lawn furniture that didn't match the approved beige and top color palette, fines for cars parked at slightly incorrect angles. But sharing frustrations wasn't enough. They needed a plan. Mark, who worked in corporate strategy, suggested a systematic approach. "We need documentation. Every single interaction, every citation, every ridiculous rule enforcement will build a case." Sarah remembered her background in journalism. "I can help compile everything. We'll create a comprehensive report that shows a pattern of harassment." The group began to organize. Each member would document every interaction with Karen or the HOA. Timestamps, photographs, exact measurements. They would be meticulous, using Karen's own bureaucratic tactics against her. What they didn't realize was how deep the rabbit hole would go, and how much Karen had to lose when her own carefully constructed world of control began to crumble. Little did Karen know the quiet street of Oak Ridge Estates was about to become a battleground of suburban rebellion. Karen Thompson's home office was a monument to bureaucratic perfection. Color-coded file cabinets lined the walls, each drawer meticulously labeled with a label maker that she had purchased specifically for HOA documentation. Spreadsheets tracked every minor infraction, every rule violation, every moment of neighborhood non-compliance. She didn't realize she was being watched. Sarah and Mark had begun their investigation in earnest. Using public records requests, they discovered something interesting. Over the past 3 years, Karen had issued more citations than the entire HOA board combined in the previous decade. Her enforcement wasn't just strict, it was systematic. "Look at this," Mark whispered during a clandestine meeting in Sarah's kitchen. He spread out a series of documents, each one a testament to Karen's bureaucratic warfare. "She's not just enforcing rules. She's generating revenue for the HOA through these fines. A pattern emerged. Karen would find the most minute violations, issue citations with precise language, and ensure that each fine was collected to the penny. Her husband, retired from a mid-level corporate job, seemed to support her crusade with spreadsheets and legal research. What they didn't know was that Karen had her own motivations. Years of feeling overlooked in her corporate career had transformed into this hyper-controlled environment. The HOA was her kingdom, and every rule was a battle she was determined to win. The neighborhood group continued to gather evidence. Lisa Chetin, who worked in local government, helped them understand the legal nuances. They discovered that many of Karen's citations were technically correct but morally questionable. A fence 2 inches too tall. A mailbox slightly off-center. Trash cans visible for 37 minutes past the allowed time. She's weaponizing bureaucracy, Lisa explained during one of their secret meetings. These aren't just rules. They're a form of control. What Karen didn't anticipate was the growing unity of the neighborhood. Each citation, each fine, each ridiculous enforcement was bringing people together. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other now found common ground in their shared frustration. The first crack in Karen's armor came unexpectedly. A young couple, new to the neighborhood, refused to pay a citation for their children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. They demanded a formal hearing, something Karen had never expected. As the hearing date approached, Sarah and her group prepared. They were no longer just victims. They were becoming strategists, ready to challenge every single rule, every single fine. Karen sat in her perfectly organized home office, unaware that the foundations of her little empire were about to be tested. The paper trail she had so carefully maintained was about to become her greatest weakness. The community center buzzed with nervous energy. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of expectant neighbors, all there to witness the first formal challenge to Karen's HOA reign. At the front of the room, a makeshift hearing panel sat stiffly. 3 HOA board members who had always rubber-stamped Karen's citations. Sarah and Mark had prepared meticulously. They brought binders full of documentation, comparative analyses of citation frequencies, maps showing the disproportionate targeting of certain homeowners, and a detailed breakdown of the financial impact of Karen's enforcement. Karen arrived precisely at 6:59 p.m., her navy blue blazer pressed within an inch of its life, her trademark clipboard clutched like a shield. She nodded curtly to the board members, all longtime acquaintances who had never questioned her methods. The hearing was supposed to be about a simple chalk drawing violation issued to the Rodriguez family. The crime? Their children had drawn hopscotch squares on the sidewalk, extending 3 inches beyond the property line. Sidewalk art creates multiple violations, Karen began, her voice clinical and practiced. Section 7, Paragraph 2 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that temporary markings are prohibited and any extension beyond property lines constitutes a community aesthetic disruption. Miguel Rodriguez, a local high school teacher, stood up. Those were my children playing. They were having fun. Since when is childhood joy a violation? Sarah had coached Miguel beforehand. His calm demeanor was deliberate, sharp contrast to Karen's rigid approach. What happened next was unexpected. Lisa Chen, who had been quietly collecting information, stood up and presented a series of photographs. They showed Karen's own grandchildren drawn on the very same type of sidewalk during a family gathering the previous summer. The room went silent. Karen's perfect composure cracked for just a moment. Her right hand, one holding the clipboard, trembled slightly. Mark seized the opportunity. He presented a comprehensive report showing that 73% of Karen's citations in the past 2 years had been against families with young children, working-class homeowners, or recent immigrants. The data was damning, a clear pattern of selective enforcement. This isn't about rules, Mark said, his voice steady. This is about power, about control. The board members shifted uncomfortably. These were people who had known Karen for years, who had always trusted her judgment. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Miguel's citation was dismissed. But more importantly, a seed of doubt had been planted. Karen's carefully constructed world of absolute control was showing its first real cracks. As the meeting adjourned, Karen gathered her things with mechanical precision. But for the first time in years, her clipboard didn't feel like a weapon of absolute authority. The neighborhood had found its voice, and Karen knew deep down that everything was about to change. Karen's husband, Gerald, had always been her silent supporter. For 32 years of marriage, he listened to her complaints about neighborhood infractions, nodded at her meticulously documented rule violations, and helped her prepare spreadsheets tracking every minor transgression. But something changed after the hearing. That night, as Karen meticulously reorganized her citation files, a ritual she performed every evening, Gerald cleared his throat. "Margaret," he said, using her first name instead of Karen, "are you sure you're doing the right thing?" She froze. Gerald rarely questioned her. Never. Their marriage had been a carefully choreographed dance of mutual respect and shared bureaucratic precision. "What do you mean?" Karen's voice was sharp, defensive. Gerald pushed his glasses up and showed her the local newspaper. A front-page article detailed the HOA hearing, complete with quotes from neighbors describing the impact of her relentless rule enforcement. The headline read, "Neighborhood in Revolt, HOA Tactics Questioned." Sarah's strategic approach was working. The media was now involved. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to grow. What started as a small resistance movement was becoming a full-scale community action network. They began attending every HOA meeting, recording everything, challenging every rule, documenting every interaction. Lisa Chen discovered something even more interesting. Karen's own property had multiple violations that she had conveniently overlooked. Her backyard shed was 2 inches taller than regulation. Her front yard landscaping deviated from the approved plant list. Her holiday decorations had been up precisely 47 minutes longer than the bylaws permitted. The irony was delicious. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors who had previously been silent now sat with prepared statements. Mark had created a detailed presentation showing the financial impact of Karen's enforcement, how the constant citations were actually driving down property values and creating a toxic community environment. Gerald watched his wife carefully. For the first time in their marriage, he saw her facade of absolute control beginning to crack. "We need to talk," he said quietly that evening after she returned from the meeting looking defeated. Karen didn't respond immediately. Her entire world, built on rules, control, and absolute precision, was slowly unraveling. The clipboard that had been her weapon now felt like a useless prop. Something was coming, a reckoning that would change everything. And Karen Thompson was about to discover that power, once challenged, rarely returns to its original form. The county municipal building was packed. What was supposed to be a routine HOA board meeting had transformed into a public hearing about neighborhood governance. Sarah, Mark, and Lisa had orchestrated this moment with surgical precision. Karen sat at the front table, her clipboard now a sad symbol of her diminishing authority. The room was filled with faces she had antagonized for years. Families she'd cited, elderly residents she harassed, working professionals she belittled. "We have documentation of systemic harassment," Sarah began, her journalist training evident in her calm, methodical presentation. She projected a series of slides showing the disproportionate number of citations issued, the financial burden on families, the psychological impact of constant rule enforcement. Mark followed with financial analysis. HOA's aggressive fine system had actually decreased property values. Potential buyers were avoiding Oak Ridge estates, deterred by its reputation for extreme micromanagement. But the most devastating testimony came from unexpected sources. Gerald Thompson, Karen's own husband, stood up. "My wife believed she was protecting our community," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But somewhere along the way, she forgot what a community actually means. It's not about perfect lawns or precise measurements. It's about people." The room went silent. Karen's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Tears formed in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something more complex. Anger, frustration, a dawning realization of what she had become. Lisa Chen presented the final piece of evidence, a comprehensive report showing how Karen's enforcement had targeted specific demographics: younger families, working-class homeowners, recent immigrants. The pattern of discrimination was clear. The county representative leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, these are serious allegations." Karen's world, built on rules, precision, and absolute control, was crumbling around her. The clipboard she had wielded like a weapon for years now seemed pathetic, almost comical. "I was just trying to maintain standards," she whispered, her voice breaking. But no one was listening anymore. The neighborhood had already moved past her. They were discussing community gardens, shared spaces, ways to actually improve their living environment. As the meeting concluded, Karen remained seated. Gerald placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not in comfort, but in a gesture that suggested everything was about to change. The HOA Karen had controlled with an iron fist was no longer hers, and her next move would define everything. 2 weeks after the public hearing, Oak Ridge Estates was unrecognizable. The rigid, color-coded landscape had begun to transform. Wildflowers sprouted in unexpected places. Children's chalk drawings decorated sidewalks. Neighbors actually spoke to each other, truly spoke, not just exchanged perfunctory greetings. Karen sat in her home office, surrounded by years of meticulously kept records. Boxes of citations, rule books, and enforcement logs covered every surface. Gerald had suggested she go through them, but not to relive her past, to understand it. "You need to see what you've created," he said gently. The county had suspended her from the HOA board pending a full investigation. Her reputation, once a source of pride, was now a liability. Neighbors who had once feared her now pitied her. Sarah Martinez, the woman whose wildflower garden had started everything, surprised everyone by reaching out. "We need to talk," her message read. They met at a local coffee shop, a neutral ground far from the manicured streets of Oak Ridge Estates. Karen arrived early, wearing a simple gray sweater, No blazer, no clipboard, just herself. I never intended to hurt anyone, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah listened, really listened. She learned about Karen's past, a woman who had never felt in control of her life until she found power in these neighborhood rules. A lifetime of feeling overlooked in her corporate job, of being the person everyone ignored, had transformed into this desperate need for control. Control is an illusion, Sarah said finally. Community is real. The conversation wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet, but it was something more powerful and understanding. Mark and Lisa had been working behind the scenes. The HOA was being restructured. No more arbitrary rules. Instead, they were creating a framework that actually supported the neighborhood, shared spaces, community programs, support for local families. Karen's world had been dismantled piece by piece, but something unexpected was emerging from the ruins. Redemption, perhaps, or something close to it. That evening, Gerald found her in the home office. Instead of organizing citations, Karen was looking through old family photographs. Pictures of herself before the rules consumed her, before the clipboard became an extension of her identity. "What now?" Gerald asked. Karen looked up, and for the first time in years, she didn't have a perfectly prepared answer. The neighborhood was watching. Her next move would change everything.